It has been 3 months since my father, Charles Morgan, passed away, and not a day goes by that I don't feel the emptiness he left behind. Losing him was not unexpected. His health had been fragile for years, but nothing could have prepared me for the silence that settled into my life after the funeral. My dad wasn't just a parent, he was my anchor, my compass, the one person whose voice could steady me no matter what storm I was facing. When the lawyer read his will, most of his belongings were directed to charities he had supported for years. A final reflection of his generosity and sense of purpose. But one item was named specifically for me: his Omega Seamaster watch, a timepiece passed down to him by his own father. It was more than an heirloom. It was a symbol of who he was, what he valued, and the bond we shared. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. I still remember the day he showed me the watch in detail, as if he were unveiling a secret family treasure. I was only 6 at the time, sitting on his lap, fascinated by the tiny ticking hands. He leaned close, his voice low and deliberate, and told me, "Rachel, this isn't just a watch. It's a reminder that time is our most valuable possession. Once it's gone, we can't get it back." His words etched themselves into my heart long before I could fully grasp their meaning. Over the years, that watch became as much a part of him as his warm laugh and steady hands. He wore it to work every day as an architect, to family holidays, and even to my college graduation, where I caught him checking it repeatedly as if to keep the day perfectly on schedule. When the lawyer's voice broke slightly while reading Dad's words, "To my daughter Rachel, I leave my Omega Seamaster, a gift from my father to me, so that she may remember not only the value of time, but how she has always been the most precious part of mine." I felt my chest tighten. I couldn't hold back the tears. It wasn't about the monetary value of the watch. Yes, it might fetch a handsome price at an auction. But to me it was priceless. It represented not just my father's love but also his legacy, a legacy that extended back through generations. Holding the watch in my hands for the first time after his passing was surreal. The weight of it was both familiar and foreign, grounding me while also making me feel the finality of his absence. I traced my fingers over the scratches on the metal, each one telling a story of a life fully lived. It wasn't polished perfection, it was a living history of the man who raised me. And in that moment, I promised myself I would treasure it, not just as a keepsake, but as a reminder of the lessons he had instilled in me: resilience, kindness, and the importance of using time wisely. What I didn't know then was that this watch, my father's last gift to me, would soon reveal far more than memories. It would unravel secrets I never imagined, and it would challenge everything I thought I knew about my family. By the time 3 months had passed since my father's funeral, life had begun to settle into a new, uneasy rhythm. I was back at work, attending client meetings and pretending that deadlines and marketing strategies were enough to distract me from the grief that still gnawed at me in quiet moments. But every Sunday night, when I looked at the Omega Seamaster resting in its box on my dresser, I felt both comforted and gutted. It was the last thing Dad had chosen for me, the last piece of him that belonged solely to us. So, when my mother called to remind me about our monthly family dinner at her house, a tradition she insisted on keeping since marrying Greg Wells, I reluctantly agreed. These dinners were rarely enjoyable. They were more like staged performances, with my mother playing the role of dutiful wife, Greg holding court at the head of the table, and Ethan boasting about whatever new business scheme he was pursuing. I went out of obligation, not desire. But this time, I had a strange heaviness in my chest before I even left my apartment. The feeling grew stronger as I turned onto the long driveway of my mother's sprawling suburban home. It was twilight, the sky painted in soft purples and oranges, but what caught my eye immediately was the sleek, jet-black Porsche parked right in front of the entrance. Its polished surface gleamed like it had just rolled off the showroom floor. My jaw tightened. Ethan. Just last month, he had cornered me in the kitchen after dinner, complaining about how broke he was, how family should invest in family, and how Greg and Mom just didn't get it. He had practically begged me to loan him money for his latest big idea. I had shut him down firmly, pointing out that I wasn't a bank and that his last 3 ventures had collapsed within a year. Now, here he was, flaunting a brand new luxury car like he had won the lottery. I parked my modest Honda further down the driveway, gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. Something was wrong. Ethan didn't just magically find money, he leached it off people, usually my mother and Greg. And yet, despite knowing his history, they always indulged him, as if his failures were just stepping stones to some inevitable success. Inside, the house smelled of rosemary and garlic. My mother had outdone herself with dinner, as always. She appeared from the kitchen, smiling warmly at me, pearls around her neck, her blonde hair set perfectly. "Rachel, darling," she said, kissing my cheek, "I'm so glad you could make it." "Of course," I murmured, forcing a smile. My eyes flicked toward the study at the end of the hall. The door was half open, light spilling through the crack. Voices drifted out, Greg's deep, commanding tone, and Ethan's lighter, careless one. I wasn't usually the type to eavesdrop, but when I heard my father's name, I froze. 15,000 was more than I expected for that old watch. Greg was saying. The pawn shop guy said it was in pristine condition. My breath caught in my throat. Ethan's voice followed, casual and dismissive. "I can flip it for 20, easy. There are collectors everywhere who'd kill for a vintage piece like that. Besides, what matters is that the money's already fueling the app. Once we get the prototype up, the investors will swarm in." My stomach twisted violently. They couldn't be talking about my father's watch. They couldn't. That Omega was mine. Dad had left it to me in his will. Mom had promised she'd keep it safe in her home safe until I decided how I wanted to preserve it. I trusted her with it. I pressed my palm against the wall to steady myself, heat rushing to my face. "And that car outside?" Ethan continued, a smug grin in his voice. "That's just the start. Once this app takes off, we're going nationwide. Coffee delivered like never before, personalized, premium, and recurring revenue. People will be hooked." Greg chuckled. "Finally, son, you're proving yourself. Much better use for that money than letting some watch sit in a drawer." The words hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't stop myself. My body moved before my brain could catch up. I shoved the door open. "What watch are you talking about?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury. Greg looked up from behind his massive mahogany desk, his face momentarily startled before he smoothed it into his usual mask of smug composure. Ethan, lounging in one of the leather chairs, barely glanced at me, still scrolling on his phone. "Rachel," Greg said, standing as though his height would intimidate me. "We didn't hear you come in." "You heard me just fine," I snapped. My gaze darted between the two of them. "What watch?" Ethan shrugged, finally putting down his phone. "Mom said it was fine. It was just collecting dust anyway." My throat tightened. My heart raced. "No," I whispered, shaking my head. "Number, tell me you didn't. Tell me you didn't sell Dad's watch." "Rachel, darling," came my mother's voice from behind me. I spun to see her standing in the doorway, her eyes wide, her hands clasped together like she'd been preparing excuses. "They're talking about selling Dad's Rolex." "No, not Rolex," I corrected, my voice rising. "His Omega. The one he left to me. The one he said was mine." The flash of guilt in her eyes confirmed everything before she even opened her mouth. "Sweetheart, we thought it was for the best," she said softly, reaching toward me. Ethan needed startup capital, and the watch was just sitting there. Just sitting there. I shouted, my voice breaking. "It wasn't yours to sell. It wasn't Dad's anymore, it was mine. He left it to me." Greg's tone hardened. "Now, Rachel, there's no need for dramatics. It was just a watch. When Ethan's app takes off, we'll buy you another one. A nicer one." I laughed bitterly, though tears blurred my vision. Just a watch? That watch was my father's life. It was his father's before him. It was the one thing he chose to give me, his daughter, not you, not Ethan. Me. Ethan smirked, leaning back lazily. "Look, the money's going to a good cause. This app is going to revolutionize coffee delivery. People are going to thank me for this." I stared at him, disgust boiling inside me. "Your coffee app is not a good cause, Ethan. It's another half-baked idea, like the food truck that lasted 2 months, or the crypto scheme you ran into the ground. You've failed at everything you've touched, and now you've stolen something irreplaceable from me to fund your next disaster." Greg crossed his arms, his patience thinning. "Technically, the watch was in our possession. And your mother agreed to the sale. It was a family decision." I turned to my mother, my voice trembling. "How could you?" You knew what that watch meant to me. To Dad. You knew. Her lips trembled, but she stood her ground. Rachel, family helps family. Ethan has real potential this time. His plan is solid. Solid? I barked out a laugh. Solid like his subscription service for pet rocks? Or the fitness app that never launched? He doesn't need investors, he needs accountability. Enough. Greg barked, his voice echoing in the study. We made a choice. You will respect it. End of 6. No, I whispered, my voice low but steady now. I won't. Dinner that evening was excruciating. We sat around the gleaming dining table in brittle silence. My plate remained untouched, my appetite smothered by the betrayal choking me. Ethan babbled on about scaling fast and market disruption, oblivious to the icy glares I sent his way. My mother kept her eyes on her plate. Greg filled his glass repeatedly, avoiding my gaze altogether. Finally, I broke the silence. Where did you sell it? I asked, my tone sharp. Ethan blinked, annoyed at the interruption. What? The watch. Which pawn shop? Where is it? Greg waved a dismissive hand. That's not important. The transaction is done. It's very important, I snapped. It was mine. I have a right to know where it is. Rachel, please, Mom whispered, her voice trembling. Can we just have a nice dinner? I threw my napkin onto the table. A nice dinner? After you betrayed me? After you gave away the one thing Dad left me? Number. I won't sit here and smile while you excuse this. Melodramatic. Greg muttered under his breath. That was the last straw. I pushed my chair back and stood, glaring at all three of them. I'm leaving. And just so you know, I will find that watch. I don't care what it takes. I'll get it back. And when I do, you'll regret ever touching it. Ethan chuckled under his breath. Good luck with that, the money's already spent. I ignored him, ignored my mother's desperate call of my name as I stormed out of the house. By the time I reached my car, tears blurred the driveway lights into smears of gold. The Porsche gleamed mockingly as I passed it. As I drove away, my chest ached like I was losing my father all over again. The betrayal burned, but underneath the grief, something else began to grow: determination. They might have sold it, but I wasn't about to let my father's legacy vanish into Ethan's latest scheme. I would find the watch. Whatever it took. I don't even remember the drive home that night. The streets blurred into streaks of light and shadow, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. My father's Omega was gone. Sold. Betrayed by the very people who should have honored his memory. The anger sat hot and heavy in my chest, pressing against the grief that was already too much to carry. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, tears had blurred everything, and I barely managed to park before breaking down completely. It wasn't just the watch. It was what it stood for. Dad had left me one thing. One thing that was mine alone. Not to Mom. Not to Greg. Certainly not to Ethan. Me. His daughter. And they had stripped it away, reducing a priceless memory to a cash transaction, funneling it into yet another one of Ethan's ridiculous ventures. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, my forehead pressed against the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to throw something. But more than anything, I wanted answers. They thought I would walk away quietly, like I always had when Greg belittled me or when Ethan played the golden child in Mom's eyes. Not this time. By the following afternoon, I had made up my mind. I was going back to my mother's house. They weren't going to sweep this betrayal under the rug. Not with me. When I arrived, the house was just as pristine as always: perfectly trimmed hedges, the faint scent of fresh paint on the shutters, the kind of suburban perfection that masked the rot festering inside. I didn't even bother knocking. Using the key Mom had given me years ago, I let myself in. My heels clicked against the polished hardwood floors as I strode straight toward the living room, where I found them exactly as I expected. Greg was in his usual place by the fireplace, swirling a glass of scotch like he owned the world. Ethan sprawled across the sofa, scrolling on his phone with an air of self-satisfaction. Mom hovered near the window, fidgeting with her pearl necklace. Where is it? I demanded, my voice sharp, cutting through the silence. Greg raised his eyebrows, but didn't look particularly surprised. Rachel, good to see you too, he said smoothly, his tone dripping with condescension. Don't play games with me, I snapped, my eyes darting between them. Where is Dad's watch? Ethan smirked without even glancing up from his phone. Already gone. Too late for you to play detective. I turned to my mother, desperate. Mom. Please. Tell me you didn't let them do this. Tell me you didn't let them sell the one thing Dad left me. Her eyes flickered with guilt before she lowered them. Rachel, sweetheart. I did approve it. We thought it was the best decision for the family. I laughed bitterly, though the sound came out broken. The family? Or Ethan? Because the last time I checked, I'm part of this family too. And Dad didn't leave that watch for you to use as seed money for Ethan's next disaster. Ethan finally looked up, rolling his eyes. You're so dramatic. Do you even understand what this app could mean? Recurring revenue. Premium subscriptions. Investors are going to eat this up. That 15 grand from the watch is nothing compared to what it'll turn into. My hands shook, rage coursing through me. You used my father's memory to buy yourself another chance to fail. That watch wasn't an investment. It was a legacy. A promise. And you destroyed it. Greg set his glass down on the mantel, his expression hardening. Rachel. Listen to yourself. You're crying over an object. It was just a watch. A hunk of steel and glass. We did something useful with it. Just a watch? I echoed, my voice trembling. That watch was with Dad through every milestone of his life. It was a gift from his father. It was his Sunday dinners, his long nights at the drafting table, his words of encouragement when I thought I couldn't make it through college. It wasn't just a watch, it was him. And you sold it like it meant nothing. End of. Mom reached toward me, her voice shaky. Sweetheart, I know you're upset, but family helps family. Ethan needed a chance, and this was a way to give it to him. I stepped back, refusing her touch. Family doesn't betray family. Family doesn't steal from one another. Dad would have never agreed to this. Never. Ethan let out a short laugh. Dad? You mean Charles? The guy who barely scraped by in his last years? He didn't know the first thing about business. My app is the future. He'd have understood that eventually. Don't you dare talk about him like that. I hissed, my vision blurring with tears. He worked hard. He built something real. Unlike you, who hides behind excuses every time one of your big ideas collapses. Greg raised his voice then, his patience snapping. That's enough. You will not stand here and insult your brother. Stepbrother, I cut in sharply. Let's not rewrite history. He glared at me, his jaw tightening. Ethan is family, and this family made a decision. You may not like it, but it's done. Move on. Move on. The words sliced through me. They wanted me to erase my father's memory the way they had reduced his life, his love, his legacy to nothing more than a line item on Ethan's balance sheet. No. I said firmly, my voice steady now. I won't move on. I'm going to get that watch back. And I don't care what it takes. Greg chuckled humorlessly, shaking his head. Good luck with that. The money's already been spent. You're tilting at windmills, Rachel. It's gone. I turned to my mother one last time, hoping for even a flicker of support, but all I saw was fear and resignation. Mom, you could have protected me. You could have honored Dad's wishes. But instead, you chose them. Her lips parted as though she wanted to explain, to justify it somehow, but nothing came out. She lowered her eyes, and in that silence, the truth was deafening. My chest ached as I grabbed my purse, my heels clicking like gunshots against the hardwood as I marched toward the door. You'll regret this, I said over my shoulder, my voice breaking. Not because of me, but because you've traded Dad's love for another one of Ethan's failures. And when it all collapses, I won't be here to pick up the pieces. The slam of the front door echoed behind me as I stepped into the cool night air, my tears hot against my cheeks. The Porsche still gleamed under the porch lights, a cruel reminder of everything I had lost. As I slid into my car, I let the sobs come, shaking so hard I could barely hold the wheel. But beneath the grief and the heartbreak, something else burned inside me. Resolve. They might think they had won. They might think I would roll over, let the betrayal wash over me, and accept their version of family. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. Dad's watch was out there somewhere, and I was going to find it. No matter what it took. The night after the confrontation, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my father's words echoing in my head. Time is our most valuable possession. Once it's gone, we can't get it back. The irony cut deep. His watch, the very symbol of time and legacy, was gone because my mother and Greg decided Ethan's latest big idea was more important than honoring his wishes. By morning, grief had hardened into something else. Resolve. If they wouldn't respect my inheritance, then I would fight for it myself. That watch wasn't just a piece of jewelry, it was my father's story, his love, and his final message to me. I refused to let it vanish into one of Ethan's doomed ventures. So I started my search. Armed with nothing but a description and determination, I spent my lunch break calling pawn shops across the city. I described the Omega Seamaster in painstaking detail. Stainless steel, deep blue dial, slight scratch on the back of the case where Dad once banged it against a door frame. Each time, I hoped for recognition. Each time, I got the same polite but firm response. Sorry, ma'am. Nothing like that's come through here. I tried to stay optimistic, telling myself I'd find the right shop eventually, but the rejection started wearing on me quickly. By the end of the week, I had called more than 30 stores. The answer never changed. The exhaustion bled into my work life. I sat through meetings at the design firm where I worked as a project manager, nodding at clients and pretending to take notes. While my mind replayed conversations with pawn shop clerks, I kept refreshing my call log, waiting for anyone to call back and say they'd found the watch. Rachel, my boss, Lauren, said during one meeting, her tone sharper than usual. What do you think about the client's concerns regarding budget allocation? I blinked, my mind scrambling to catch up. Everyone around the table was looking at me. My throat went dry. Well, I think we can adjust the proposal to. My voice trailed off as I realized I had no idea what they were talking about. Lauren's eyes narrowed, though she quickly smoothed her expression in front of the client. We'll revisit that point after the meeting, she said, rescuing me but not without a clear edge to her voice. Afterward, she pulled me aside. Rachel, this isn't like you. You're usually sharp and prepared. What's going on? The concern in her voice made me want to cry, but I swallowed hard. It's personal. Something with my family. I'm sorry. I'll get back on track. She sighed. I hope so. You're too good at your job to let yourself slip like this. I know. Her disappointment stung, but it didn't break my resolve. If anything, it made me more determined to push forward. That weekend, I decided phone calls weren't enough. If I was going to find the watch, I had to see for myself. So I drove across the city, visiting pawn shops in person. The first shop was cluttered, dimly lit, and smelled faintly of dust and old leather. Guitars leaned against the wall, glass cases displayed mismatched jewelry, and the owner eyed me suspiciously as I described the Omega. Lady, I see a dozen watches a week, he said, shaking his head. Yours doesn't ring a bell. The next shop was cleaner, more organized, but the result was the same. The clerk, a young man with tattoos covering his arms, checked his computer system before frowning. Nothing like that in our records. Sorry. By the fifth store, my optimism was fraying. I clutched the photo I carried of Dad wearing the watch at my college graduation, holding it out like proof of what I was looking for. Some clerks were sympathetic, promising to call if anything matching the description came in. Others barely looked at it, already dismissing me before I finished speaking. Each rejection was a fresh punch to the gut. I left shops with my chest tight, my throat aching from holding back tears. The search consumed me. I skipped dinners with friends, ignored calls from coworkers, and lived on coffee and determination. My apartment became a mess of scribbled notes, maps with circles marking pawn shops I had visited, and sticky notes with names and phone numbers of clerks who promised to keep an eye out. Every night, I collapsed on my couch, drained. And every morning, I forced myself to get up and try again. Mom called once during that week. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was clipped, almost defensive. Rachel, I know you're upset, but it was for the best. Please stop obsessing over this. It's just a watch. Just a watch. The words lit a fire in my chest all over again. One evening, after a particularly discouraging day of dead ends, I sat staring at an old photo of Dad and me. In it, we were on the porch of his house, and he had his arm around me, the Omega gleaming faintly in the sunlight. My throat tightened as I remembered that day, the smell of fresh cut grass, the sound of his laugh. I whispered into the empty apartment. "I'll find it, Dad. I promise." The next morning, I expanded my search to neighboring towns. I drove miles out of the city, wandering into pawn shops in areas I'd never been to before. Some owners were kind, offering sympathetic smiles as they shook their heads. Others eyed me with suspicion, perhaps wondering if I was trying to track down stolen property. By the 10th shop that day, my voice was hoarse from repeating the same description, my feet sore from pacing. I was beginning to feel foolish, like I was chasing a ghost. What if the watch had already been sold to a private collector? What if it was halfway across the country by now? That thought nearly broke me. But then I remembered Dad's words when he gave me advice about my first job after college. Persistence, Rachel. That's what wins in the end. You don't stop just because it's hard, Ulcree. So I pressed on. By the second week of my search, the exhaustion was undeniable. My boss, Lauren, called me into her office after I spaced out during another client meeting. "Rachel, I don't know what's going on, but this can't continue," she said, folding her hands on her desk. "You're distracted. Your performance is slipping. You need to take some time off and sort whatever this is out." I opened my mouth to argue, but she cut me off with a raised hand. "I'm not firing you. I'm giving you a chance to get it together. Use your personal days. Figure this out. Then come back ready to work." Tears pricked my eyes. I hadn't realized how obvious my obsession had become. But at the same time, I was grateful. Time off meant more room to search. So I took her advice. I spent the next 3 days driving from one end of the city to the other, expanding my circle farther each day. My car became my second home, fast food wrappers piling on the passenger seat, the radio tuned low to keep me company during long stretches of silence. Still, the answer was always the same. "Sorry, ma'am. Haven't seen it." On the third night, I sat in my car outside a dingy pawn shop, the neon open sign flickering weakly. My body screamed with exhaustion, but I forced myself to go in. The clerk shook his head before I even finished describing the watch. I walked back to my car, slamming the door shut. My chest heaved as tears streamed down my face. For the first time since the search began, I let myself think the unthinkable. Maybe it really was gone. Maybe I would never see my father's watch again. The thought hollowed me out, leaving me gasping in the silence of the car. But even then, even at my lowest, a small ember of determination burned inside me. I couldn't give up. Not yet. Not ever. That watch was out there. Somewhere, and I would keep searching until I found it. I was running on fumes when the call came. 2 weeks of dead ends had left me ragged, my optimism worn thin, my eyes permanently rimmed with exhaustion. The search for my father's Omega had consumed me completely, hollowing out any normal rhythm of life. Work was on hold, my friends barely heard from me, and my nights were spent staring at the ceiling, torn between despair and determination. That morning, I'd sat on the couch surrounded by maps, scribbled notes, and half-drunk cups of coffee. My phone buzzed against the table, displaying an unfamiliar number. Normally, I would have ignored it. But something in me stirred an instinct, maybe. I answered. "Hello?" My voice was hoarse, barely steady. "Is this Rachel Morgan?" The voice was deep, gravelly, but not unkind. "Yes." "Who's calling?" "My name is Harold Carter. I own Carter's Exchange down on Oakwood Avenue. Pawn shop, small place. I believe I may have something that belongs to you, or at least something that should belong to you." My pulse spiked. I clutched the phone tighter. "Are you talking about a watch? An Omega Seamaster?" There was a pause, then a deliberate. "Yes, ma'am. A Seamaster, stainless steel, blue dial, minor scratch on the back plate. Bought it 2 weeks ago from a Mr. Greg Wells and his son." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred, my body trembling. "That's my father's watch," I whispered. "They had no right to sell it, it was left to me in his will." "I figured as much," Mr. Carter said, his tone calm but laced with something heavier, like conviction. "Something about that sale didn't sit right with me. That's why I'm calling you now." Tears welled up in my eyes. "You still have it? You haven't sold it yet?" "No, ma'am. I haven't put it on display. But..." His voice lowered, steady but serious. There's something unusual about this watch. Something I don't believe those two men knew about. Something you should see for yourself. My heart pounded. What do you mean? I'd rather not say over the phone. If you can come by my shop, I'll explain. I close at 6. Can you make it by 5:30? Yes, I blurted, already standing, gathering my keys, my purse, my resolve. I'll be there. Good. Bring identification. I'll hold the watch for you. And effed. The line went dead, and for a moment, I stood frozen in the middle of my apartment, the weight of it all pressing down. After weeks of hopeless searching, the trail hadn't just gone warm, it was on fire. I grabbed my jacket and bolted out the door. Carter's Exchange was the kind of place you could drive past 100 times and never notice. Wedged between a laundromat and a discount furniture store, its faded black and gold sign gave no hint of what treasures or secrets might be tucked inside. The windows were barred, though neatly arranged displays of guitars, cameras, and jewelry gleamed behind the glass. The bell above the door jingled as I pushed it open. The air inside smelled faintly of polish and old wood. Display cases lined the room, each carefully organized rings and watches in glass boxes. Vintage electronics stacked on shelves, a row of musical instruments along the back wall. Behind the counter stood a man in his 60s. Silver hair combed back, glasses perched on his nose. His eyes were sharp, but kind, the kind of eyes that missed nothing. He looked up as I entered. Miss Morgan? Yes. You must be Mr. Carter. He nodded. I appreciate you coming. Been in this business 35 years. You learn to spot when something's off. The men who sold me this watch, they spoke of it like it was disposable. Like it was just a way to buy themselves some time. But I could tell it meant more. So I did a little digging. Found your father's obituary, mentioned his daughter. That's how I found you. My throat tightened. Thank you, I said softly. You have no idea how much this means. I think I might, he replied, reaching beneath the counter. When he placed the watch on the glass in front of me, my breath hitched. There it was. Dad's Omega. Still gleaming, still whole, as if it had been waiting for me. My hands trembled as I reached for it, but Mr. Carter gently held it back. Before I hand it over, he said, you should know what I found. I blinked. What do you mean? He turned the watch over, tapping a nearly invisible seam on the back of the case. With practiced fingers, he pressed, twisted, and slid it open. To my shock, a thin section of the case shifted, revealing a hidden compartment no larger than a postage stamp. Me eyes widened. I never knew. Most people don't, Carter explained. High-end watches from this era sometimes had compartments like this. Cold War days. People hid microfilm, tiny notes, even smuggled keys. This one had contents. 2, to be exact. He reached into a drawer and carefully unfolded a small, faded photograph. My breath caught as I saw it, a picture of me as a child, maybe 7 years old, sitting on the beach with Dad kneeling beside me, both of us smiling at a half-built sandcastle. My vision blurred instantly with tears. Oh, God. I remember that day. He took me to Florida after Mom canceled our summer trip. Just the two of us. He always said it was one of his favorite memories. Mr. Carter nodded gently. And alongside that photo this. And 8. From the drawer, he pulled a small brass key, delicate but ornate, unlike any house or car key I'd ever seen. The head of it was engraved with a geometric pattern, intricate and old-fashioned. I reached out, my fingers trembling as I held it. The metal was cool, heavy with mystery. What does it open? I whispered. That, Carter said, I can't tell you. But if your father kept it hidden here, it must be important. He clearly wanted you to find it. End of quote. I stared at the key in my palm, my mind racing. Dad had never mentioned a hidden compartment. Never hinted at secrets tucked away in his beloved watch. Why now? Why me? Why didn't Greg or Ethan notice this? I asked. Because they didn't care, Carter said firmly. They saw the watch as money, not memory. They wouldn't have looked deeper. They couldn't see what mattered. His words hit me like a hammer. That was exactly it. To them, Dad's watch was just a bargaining chip. To me, it was everything. Mr. Carter, I said, swallowing hard. How much did you pay for it? $15,000, he replied. Its value's closer to 18, maybe more, given its condition. But considering the circumstances, I'll sell it back to you at my cost. No profit. Tears spilled down my cheeks as I nodded. Yes. Yes. Please. I'll transfer the money right now. He smiled kindly. Take your time. The watch is yours by right. End quote. I processed the payment with shaky hands, then watched as Carter finally slid the watch across the counter. The moment it touched my palm, relief washed over me. The weight of it was familiar, grounding, like a piece of my father had finally come home. Thank you, I whispered, fastening it around my wrist. The tiny photo and the mysterious key I tucked back into the compartment, sealing it as Dad must have intended. Carter nodded. Sometimes doing the right thing costs money, but some things are worth more than a profit, remember that. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and felt a surge of gratitude. You've given me back more than a watch. You've given me back my father. As I left the shop, the evening sun caught the Omega's crystal, casting a flash of light that felt almost like a blessing. But the weight of the key pressed against my wrist, reminding me that this wasn't over. My father had hidden something. A secret. A truth he hadn't told me. And now, with the watch back on my wrist and the key in my possession, I had to find out what it unlocked. For hours after leaving Carter's exchange, I couldn't stop staring at the brass key. It rested in my palm like something alive, humming with meaning. Small, intricate, and impossibly mysterious, it seemed to pulse with questions I wasn't ready to answer. I sat at my kitchen table with the Omega laid gently before me, its hidden compartment open, the tiny photograph of Dad and me beside the key. The photo brought a swell of warmth and sadness all at once. That day on the beach had been one of the happiest of my childhood, just me and Dad, the sun on our backs, the waves erasing the edges of our sandcastle as we laughed. Now, paired with the key, it felt less like a memory and more like a clue. But a clue to what? I turned the key over in my fingers, studying the ornate design etched into its head. It didn't look like it belonged to a house or car. It was smaller, more delicate, like it was meant for a box, a drawer, or perhaps a safe. Then, all at once, a thought hit me. The storage unit. After Dad's death, I had rented a small unit across town to hold the things I couldn't fit in my apartment, his reading chair, his vinyl collection, stacks of engineering journals, boxes of personal items I hadn't yet had the heart to sort through. Could it be that the key belonged to something there? The idea took hold like fire. By the time I grabbed my coat and purse, my hands were shaking with urgency. The storage facility was quiet when I arrived. A cold wind whipped through the rows of metal doors as I punched in my access code. Unit 3-5. My father's life condensed into a padlocked rectangle of space. I pulled the door open, the familiar musty scent of paper and leather filling my nose. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, flicking on the overhead light. Stacks of boxes loomed around me, each one labeled in Dad's careful handwriting: journals, photos, engineering files. His old reading chair sat in the corner, its fabric worn but still dignified, as though waiting for him to come back and sit in it one more time. I moved methodically, opening box after box, searching for anything that might match the key. At first, it was all familiar tax documents, family albums, Dad's slide rule collection. My hope began to falter until, hidden behind a stack of vinyl records, I spotted it. A wooden box. It was about the size of a thick textbook, crafted from dark walnut with brass fittings. On the front, a small brass plate bore Dad's initials: CJM Charles James Morgan. And just below it, a tiny keyhole. My breath caught. My hands trembled as I slid the ornate key inside. It fit perfectly. With a soft click, the lock gave way. The lid opened smoothly, and what I saw inside nearly buckled my knees. The top layer was a stack of envelopes, each one addressed to me in Dad's handwriting. My throat tightened as I lifted the first one, dated 5 years earlier. I unfolded the letter with shaking hands. My dearest Rachel, it began. If you are reading this, it means I am no longer here to explain things in person. I debated for years whether to tell you what I discovered, but I didn't want to burden you too soon. Now, time has forced my hand. You deserve to know the truth. I read the words through tears, my heart hammering. The letters continued in sequence, each one a piece of Dad's thoughts, love, and regrets. Some were deeply personal memories of me as a child, advice about resilience, reminders that I had always been the light of his life. Others were darker, outlining discoveries he had made about Greg's business practices. The second layer of the box was a leather portfolio filled with documents, bank statements, emails, contracts. As I flipped through them, my stomach dropped. Dad had uncovered proof that Greg had used insider information Mom had unknowingly provided to sabotage Dad's company during a major bid years earlier. Greg had undercut their proposal, secured contracts for his own businesses, and left Dad's firm financially crippled. I ran my fingers over the documents, bile rising in my throat. My father hadn't been paranoid or bitter, as Greg had often implied. He had been right. The final item was a USB drive labeled simply, "For Rachel." With trembling hands, I packed everything into a bag and drove straight home. I didn't even take my coat off before plugging the USB into my laptop. The screen flickered, and then there he was. My father. Alive, speaking directly to me from beyond the grave. His voice filled my apartment, raspy but steady, his face tired but resolute. He sat in his favorite chair, the one now gathering dust in the storage unit. "Rachel, my sweet girl," he said, his eyes soft. "If you're watching this, it means I didn't get the chance to explain in person. I'm sorry for that. But I needed to make sure you had the information to protect yourself." Entry 2. I clutched the arm of my chair, tears spilling freely. He explained everything. How Greg had manipulated Mom, using her access to Dad's professional life to gather information. How he had used that to secure contracts for his dealership's supply chain while driving Dad's firm into the ground. Dad's voice shook at times, but his resolve never faltered. "I chose not to pursue legal action," he admitted in one video. "Partly to spare your mother the shame, partly because the statute of limitations made it difficult. But I couldn't let the truth die with me. You need to know who Greg really is. And you need to be ready to protect yourself." Each video built on the last. He outlined evidence, naming names, pointing to documents in the box. He even mentioned whistleblowers from Greg's company who had quietly sent him information. But between the details of betrayal and corruption, he always returned to me. "Rachel, you've always been my greatest joy. I'm so proud of the woman you've become. Whatever you choose to do with this information, know that I trust your judgment completely." By the time the final video ended, I was sobbing openly. Seeing him alive again, hearing his voice, was like tearing open a wound I thought had started to scar. But beneath the grief was something stronger, a rising fire in my chest. Dad had trusted me with this truth. He had chosen me to carry it, and I would not let that trust be in vain. I sat at my desk until dawn, spreading out the documents, rereading the letters, replaying the videos. The evidence was damning. Greg hadn't just undermined Dad's career, he had done it deliberately, with malice, while using my mother's trust as a weapon. The letters revealed how much it had hurt Dad, though he'd never shown it. To the world, he'd carried on, quiet and steadfast. To me, he'd always been loving, never bitter. Now I realized how much he had shielded me from. As the first light of morning crept through the blinds, I leaned back in my chair, the watch heavy on my wrist, the key glinting beside the letters. My tears had dried into a fierce determination. Greg had stolen my father's legacy once. He had taken the watch. He had poisoned my mother with lies. But this time, I had the truth. I had proof. And I wasn't going to let him bury it. The Omega ticked steadily, each second a reminder, time only moves forward. It was time to act. The sun had barely set when I made the call. My hands shook as I dialed my mother's number, the stack of documents and Dad's USB drive laid out in front of me like a loaded weapon. She answered on the second ring, her voice tired, wary. "Rachel? What is it now? Haven't we fought enough about the watch?" "No, Mom," I said, my tone steelier than I'd ever used with her before. "We haven't even begun. I want you, Greg, and Ethan at the house tomorrow evening at 7. I've discovered some things you all need to hear. Don't argue, just be there." She started to protest, but I cut her off. "This isn't optional." And for the first time in my life, I hung up on my mother. The next day, I barely touched food. My nerves pulsed like electric wires, but beneath them ran a current of iron determination. Dad had trusted me with the truth, and I wasn't going to let fear keep me from delivering it. At exactly 7, I pulled into the driveway of the Wells mansion. The Porsche still sat smugly in front, gleaming under the porch lights. But this time I didn't flinch. I had bigger battles to fight. When my mother opened the door, her expression was a mixture of apprehension and annoyance. Rachel, this had better not be another performance about the watch. You'll see, I said curtly, brushing past her. Greg and Ethan were in the living room, waiting like they'd been summoned to court. Greg stood by the fireplace, drink in hand, his usual smirk of superiority tugging at his lips. Ethan lounged on the sofa, scrolling on his phone. I took a seat in the armchair opposite them, deliberately placing Dad's Omega on the coffee table between us. Its blue dial gleamed under the chandelier. Greg's smirk faltered. You found it, he said, voice clipped. Yes, I said evenly. I bought it back. From the pawn shop where you and Ethan sold it. I let the silence hang before adding, and I know everything now. My mother sat down beside Ethan, her hands clutching her pearls. Rachel, what is all this? I opened my portfolio and slid a sheet of paper across the table toward Greg. He glanced down, then froze. It was the email, his own words, bragging about how Mom had unknowingly given him the information he needed to sabotage Dad's firm. Color drained from his face. What is this? My mother whispered, picking it up. She scanned it quickly, her eyes widening, then snapping toward Greg. You said it was just business talk. What does this mean? Greg swallowed hard but said nothing. It means, I said, my voice trembling with fury, that while you thought Dad's firm collapsed because of the market, it was Greg. He used you, Mom. He took the information you shared about Dad's projects, things you thought were innocent conversation, and used it to undercut his bids. He crippled Dad's company. Dozens of people lost their jobs. His colleagues, his friends. People who trusted him. That's ridiculous, Greg barked, his voice rising, but his eyes darted nervously to the stack of documents in my lap. Is it? I pulled out another set of papers, contracts, timelines, evidence Dad had collected. Because I have more. Emails. Bank statements. Whistleblowers from your own company sent Dad proof. He documented everything. My mother's face was pale, her lips trembling. Greg. Tell me this isn't true. Greg set his glass down with a clink, his voice sharp. It's being taken out of context. Everyone looks for an edge in business. Thomas wasn't competitive enough, that's all this was. Don't you dare. I snapped, leaning forward. Don't you dare reduce what you did to some business tactic. This wasn't just about money. You were jealous. You wanted to prove you were more successful than Dad, and you used Mom to do it. Admit it. Greg's jaw worked furiously, but he said nothing. My mother turned to him, eyes brimming with tears. All these years, I thought Thomas failed because of his own mistakes. I thought he just couldn't keep up. And you? She broke off, pressing a hand to her mouth. I softened my tone slightly, turning to her. Mom, Dad never blamed you. He knew you didn't realize what Greg was doing. But he wanted me to know. To protect myself. And now you know too. The silence was heavy, broken only by Ethan finally looking up from his phone, frowning. What are you even trying to prove? The past is the past. Dad's company failed, sure. But look at us now. My app. Your app? I laughed bitterly. Tell the truth, Ethan. How much of that watch money actually went to the app? Because I don't believe for 1 second it all went to development. Ethan's cheeks reddened. Of course it did. Really? I leaned forward. Or did it go to cover your gambling debts? Your so-called development costs were just another excuse, weren't they? Ethan shifted uncomfortably, his eyes dropping. I did spend some of it on the app. But yeah, I had debts. Big ones. I needed to clear them. Greg whipped toward him, his face thunderous. You what? I ignored Greg's outrage and focused on Ethan. So you admit it. You sold my inheritance. You stole from me. And you wasted it. The room buzzed with tension, my mother sitting frozen, Greg seething, Ethan slumped like a guilty child. I let the silence stretch before I laid down my terms. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice low but firm. First, you will reimburse me the $15,000 I spent buying back my father's watch. Every penny. Second, you will donate $20,000 to the retirement fund for the former employees of Dad's firm who lost their jobs because of your actions, Greg. You destroyed livelihoods. You will help rebuild them. Greg opened his mouth to argue, but I cut him off with a glare. And third, you will admit the truth. To Mom. To me. No excuses. No spin, just the truth. Greg laughed bitterly, though it rang hollow. And if I refuse? Then I send everything I have to the SEC, the state attorney general, and the press. I have Dad's files. His videos. His witnesses. Do you really want your empire dragged through the mud? Because I will burn it down. For the first time, real fear flickered in his eyes. We locked gazes, a silent battle. Finally, my mother's voice cut through, trembling but resolute. Greg. Do it. All of it. She's right. End fourth. Greg whipped toward her, stunned. Kathleen. No, she snapped, her voice rising in a way I'd never heard before. You lied to me. You used me. And you destroyed Thomas's company while smiling in my face. You will do what Rachel asks. Or you will lose far more than money. The fight drained from Greg's posture. He slumped slightly, muttering, Fine. Say it, I pressed. He exhaled heavily. Yes. I used information your mother gave me. I undercut Thomas's proposal. It was unethical. I did it because I wanted to outshine him. Because I couldn't stand that she still respected him. The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. My mother covered her face with her hands, sobbing quietly. I turned to Ethan. And you? Say it. He squirmed. I used the money to pay off gambling debts. The app was never going to happen. I just needed the cash. The admission dropped like a stone in the room. I rose from my chair, gathering my watch and documents. Good. The truth is out. Now follow through. The money. The donation. And pray, that's all I ask of you. As I turned toward the door, my mother's voice called softly. Rachel. Wait. I looked back. Her eyes were swollen, but her voice was clear. I'm so sorry. I should have protected you. I should have protected Thomas's memory. I let them convince me it was right. But I see now it was betrayal. Please. Forgive me. I swallowed hard, my chest aching. I don't know if I can. Not yet. But I'll try, because you're still my mother. And I love you. And with that, I walked out, the omega heavy but steady on my wrist, its ticking louder than my heartbeat. 6 months have passed since that night, the night I laid Greg's sins bare and forced Ethan to confess what he had done. So much has changed in half a year that sometimes I wonder if I'm living someone else's life. But then I look down at my wrist, at the steady tick of my father's Omega Seamaster, and I remember. This is my story. My mother, Linda, eventually moved out of the mansion. For the first time in decades, she's living on her own, in a quiet apartment downtown. She told me she needed space to think, to reevaluate what her marriage had become. We meet once a week for coffee now, small steps toward rebuilding what Greg nearly destroyed between us. Our conversations are still tentative, but they're real. She listens when I speak, she admits when she's wrong. I can see the weight lifting from her shoulders as she begins to recognize the years of manipulation she endured. Whether she divorces Greg or not is her choice. But I know she'll never look at him the same way again. Ethan is in rehab. He resisted at first, but after his gambling debts caught up to him and Greg cut him off financially, he finally agreed to get help. I won't pretend I suddenly feel close to him. We may never have a sibling bond, but knowing he's confronting his demons gives me a measure of peace. For the first time, he's not chasing empty schemes. He's facing himself. That's a bigger step than any app idea he ever pitched. As for Greg, his empire isn't what it once was. Word travels quickly in business, and though I never released the full scope of Dad's files, enough leaked to tarnish his reputation. Investors backed out of deals, partners kept their distance. The sheen of untouchable success that Greg had cultivated cracked, revealing what he truly was: a man who built his fortune on betrayal and lies. Watching him stumble wasn't revenge, it was justice. And me? I've built something of my own. Using the investments Dad quietly left in my name, I launched my own consultancy, specializing in helping small engineering firms and family-owned businesses navigate marketing and growth, the kind of firms Greg had crushed to make himself richer. The work feels like honoring Dad's legacy while carving out my own. My first client was a mid-sized design firm on the brink of collapse. 6 months later, they're thriving. Every success I help create feels like a quiet victory against everything Greg tried to take. The watch never leaves my wrist now. It's no longer just a reminder of loss, it's a symbol of strength, truth, and legacy. Every time I hear the faint tick, I hear my father's voice echoing in my mind. Time is precious. Use yours to build the life you deserve. And that's exactly what I'm doing. Looking back on everything I've endured, the loss of my father, the betrayal of my family, the painful truths that surfaced, I've come to realize that life's most valuable lessons are often hidden within heartbreak. My father's watch wasn't just an heirloom, it was a reminder that time reveals truth, no matter how deeply others try to bury it. Greg's deception and Ethan's selfishness showed me how greed corrodes love, and how silence can enable betrayal. But I also learned that courage isn't about never feeling fear, it's about choosing to confront the truth even when it shakes the ground beneath you. My mother's journey reminded me that it's never too late to see clearly, to reclaim your own voice, and to walk away from what no longer serves you. And for me, the lesson was this. Your worth isn't defined by what others take from you, but by what you choose to protect, rebuild, and create. Time is precious, and every choice we make writes the story of our legacy. My father's voice still echoes in my mind. Use your time to build the life you deserve. And finally, I am. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.